evening and welcome to the Nation Leadership Forum. I'm your host, Olive Barrows. So you know how when you go to the doctor and he prescribes antibiotics and he cautions you to be sure to finish your dose. As he probably told you, it's to guard against bacteria developing resistance to the drug. But the problem far outstrips the doctor's office, and antimicrobial resistance in animal production has been identified as a significant emerging threat to public health and food security. Now, I have three guests with me this evening, two with me in the studio to help us gain a better understanding of what is at stake. I'll start with Dr. Victor Yamo, who is the Farming Campaigns Manager, World Animal Protection. He's also a veterinary surgeon and he holds a Master's of Business Administration. In the private sector, he worked in management at Kenchik and Equity Bank, and he's also worked in the NGO sector, including at World Vision International. Also with me this evening in studio is Dr. Charles Ochodo, and he is Senior Deputy Director of Veterinary Services, and he's also the Head of Veterinary Governance and Policy at the Directorate of Veterinary Services. He's worked as a field veterinarian and he's lectured at the Meat Training Institute. He's also a member of the Kenya Veterinary Board. Away from the studio, we are joined by Principal Compliance and Enforcement Officer for NEMA, and that is Dr. John Mumbo, and he has 10 years experience in environmental management. He holds a BSc from JQAT, Masters in Chemistry from Maseno University, and a doctorate from the Technical University of Munich. All right, now that we have a better understanding of our guests this evening, let's get a better understanding of what antimicrobial resistance is. And I'll start with you, Dr. Yamo. What is this animal called AMR?
Thank you very much, Oli, for the question. AMR, or antimicrobial resistance, is essentially where disease-causing organisms become resistant to known drugs that are used to medicate them. In a layman's language, you would be saying we are talking about drug resistance. It can be resistance against antibiotics, which is the common one that we talk about. It can also be resistance against antiparasitics, like the drugs we use for worms. It could be resistance against antiviral drugs. So essentially that's what we are looking at. And I think World Health Organization and World Organization for Animal Health and FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, then came together and said, because we are seeing a steady increase in resistance of these drugs, and we are not having enough drugs being produced to mitigate against what is becoming resistant, that we then celebrate in a week that ran last week from 18th to about 24th globally, to just then look at it and sensitize people around it.
So that was the awareness week, and initially it was the antibiotic awareness week. Now it's the antimicrobial awareness. It's been changed to antimicrobial awareness week, and that's because this is a problem that far outstrips antibiotics. We are talking about fungal medication, viral, and also parasitic. Dr. Chodo, let me bring you in at this point. Why do we have two vets in the studio? Because most people would think, okay, wouldn't we have physicians in studio? Dr. Chodo?
Yes, to add to what Dr. Yamo has said, antimicrobial resistance is really growing, is a growing problem in the country and in the world. And there are different reasons for this for Kenya. The main reason is actually the way we behave with the antibiotics or antimicrobials. We tend to see the misuse where people use antimicrobials when it is necessary, unnecessary. Then there is abuse where people use antimicrobials wrongly, and there is also overuse. So the behavior of the public and the users of these antimicrobials tend to increase resistance among animals. So what needs to be done really is to manage the way this happens, and there are different methods or mechanisms that have been put in place. We shall come to this later.
Okay, so Dr. Yamo, how are these AMRs introduced to animals?
Well, I want to start by saying that, just to piggyback on what Dr. Ochodo was saying, the reason why maybe we have two vets in the studio is that the massive antibiotics used in animal production is horrendous. Research shows that 75% of antibiotics produced globally, annually, is actually being used in production in farm animals. And that is why we are beginning to look at it critically, because if you can stop the use of antibiotics at farm animal level, research again shows that you will reduce antimicrobial resistance, especially antibiotic resistance, by about 24% in human populations. So to go to your question, why does that then happen? The main thing, the reason that contributes to that, some of it Ochodo has already alluded to, the fact that we are misusing antibiotics. The main reason why we use antibiotics is because the environment where the animal is, or the welfare of that animal, is not being catered for. So farmers have quickly learned that if you put antibiotics into the production system, you mask the poor welfare, and the animal is able to achieve some level of performance. But in harsh reality, what farmers do not see is that when you add antibiotics or introduce antibiotics, either for growth promotion or to mask poor welfare, or to treat animals because they've fallen sick as a sequelae of poor production systems, you're actually adding another layer of trouble, because what comes out of that animal, and animals are very interesting, Olive, they tend to concentrate whatever you feed them on. So if you're feeding them or introducing antibiotics, what comes out is that there'll be antibiotics in milk, there'll be antibiotics in eggs, there'll be antibiotics in the meat, which then has an impact on human population. And maybe that is one of the reasons why we are looking at it. So from an organization, World Animal Protection, our mantra is that it is important to look at how we are handling animals, the welfare of that animal. And there are 5 things that we look at, which I think we will discuss as we go along, that when we cater for them, and they're called fundamental freedoms, if you look at those fundamental freedoms and the animal is catered for and its welfare is looked at, then it produces, performance goes up, so you have better productivity, but added to that, you have a better quality product that has no additives, that will not have negative impacts on the population. Yeah.
Okay, so the other day I was watching the news and I saw parliamentarians in Thailand, I think, was it Taiwan? I can't recall, one of those tea countries. And one of them had permitted the importation of pork from the US, which they said farmers use a certain drug to make the meat leaner and therefore more profitable. So are antibiotics, Dr. Ochodo, used by farmers, for instance, to increase growth?
Yes, this has been a problem in this country and in other parts of the world. Like Dr. Yamu says, farmers tend to use antibiotics to do certain things. And one of these things is really to promote growth. And they promote growth by controlling the microorganisms that might affect these animals. So you'll find antibiotics in what we call medicated feeds. There might be certain injections that are given that contain these antimicrobials. And in our country, we tend to see a bit of that in the poultry production. There's also a bit of it in pig production. But what is important to say is that as a country, we have banned the use of antimicrobials as growth promoters. So when farmers or animal owners do that, they are actually doing it against the law. And what we try is not really to go and arrest them, because sometimes people are ignorant of the law, and these are our farmers. So what we try to do is to get down to them and create awareness among them on the danger of antimicrobial resistance, because as Dr. Yamu says, there is always that transfer of resistance that develops between animals and human beings as a result of consuming animal products. And later we shall learn that this is also transferred to the environment when these products like milk get disposed in the environment. The bacteria and these microorganisms, some of them live in the environment. And so if they get these small doses of antibiotics or antimicrobials, they learn to resist, and that is how resistance develops.
Okay.
So growth promoters is something we really want to tell our viewers is not allowed in the country. And if they know of anybody who is using medication to promote growth, then it's better to caution or raise attention, bring it to us. But what we know is that because of the poor hygiene conditions, the poor environment in which animals are kept, then people are forced to continuously use antimicrobials. Also, infections tend to be more common in unclean environments. We tend to see this a lot with the milk. When, because of the unclean environment, then we have infection of the udder. That leads to mastitis, and antimicrobials have to be used. And because again, our farmers do not want to observe the withdrawal period, the period within which we should not use the milk, then we end up consuming milk even when the animals are being treated. And that is how the organisms in us also get those subdoses and eventually develop resistance.
Okay. It's a good thing you said that growth promoters are banned in this country, because I was afraid I was going to have to give up what we colloquially know as kukupono. But it's a good thing you introduced the environment, because Dr. Mumbo, and I was told we have somebody from NEMA taking part in this conversation. I wondered, what does the environment have to do with AMRs? The two veterinarians have sort of given us an inkling as to what the relationship is, but perhaps you can tackle it more substantively. What does the environment have to do with antimicrobial resistance, particularly in animal production?
Okay, thank you, Oliver Barros, for that question. Before I delve into the question, I'd want to bring this subject of environment quite clearly, because when we talk about health, what usually happens is that you always look at the curative aspect, and that's why we've been hearing from veterinary specialists here. They've been talking about injection, growth promoter hormones. Yeah, but in Kenya, we have the way environmental management is being administered. First of all, the environment is enshrined within the Constitution, whereby it provides for a right to clean and healthy environment to each and every Kenyan. So without a clean environment, of course, you're going to talk about diseases. And also that we also have an environmental management law. And this environmental management law is actually called Environment Management and Coordination Act, which actually governs all aspects that relate to the environment. And it's also important to know that you also have a ministry, that's a Ministry of Environment and Forestry, which provides for policy development. And also under the ministry, there are quite a number of environmental agencies, of which we have the National Environment Management Authority. So it's quite important for us to understand why environment comes here, because under this campaign we have what is called One Health approach. And One Health approach is actually brings different sectors. It's actually a strategy whereby we have the, those ones who are taking care of the human health, there's the animal health, and also we also have the environmental health. Yeah, so in this case, in this forum, we have only representation from animal health and environment. Yeah, so just to make it clear is that after you've used all the medicines, after you've generated all the waste that come from the animals, from the human beings, all these things end up into the environment. And the environment becomes the receptor of all these chemicals. As alluded by one of the panelists, when these antibiotics get into the environment, these antibiotics have what are called active ingredients. And these active ingredients, once they are not destroyed, they end up interacting with microorganisms within the environment. And these microorganisms tend to develop some resistance. And these microorganisms get transferred to us through the food chain. It can come indirectly through the food we eat. It can come indirectly through the water we drink, such that now you start using the same medicine, but you find that it's not actually effective in your system. So as we look at this antimicrobial resistance, it is good that for us all, we need to look to think about the human health. We need to think about the animal health. But above all, we also need to look at the environment, which is actually a receptor of all these chemicals that actually end up here. Otherwise, you will have a situation whereby the environment harbors all these toxins, which are brought by the food we eat, and then they come and build this in the resistance indirectly within our systems. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Yamo, I mean, okay, first, Dr. Mumbo, I'm a bit worried when you talk about water, because I was like, maybe I should become a vegetarian, but then if it's also the AMRs, antimicrobial resistant organisms are also found in water, then that's a serious cause for concern. But back to animals, I know there is person-to-person transmission, and there can also be a transmission through which we've all said, through the food we eat by way of the animals. Over the COVID period, even with Ebola, there were certain animals, with Ebola, you are told do not eat wild meat, and bats, monkeys were blamed for transmission with COVID-19, but with the AMR, antimicrobial resistant organisms, what animals in close contact to humans should we be concerned about, or should we pay particular attention to? Dr. Yamo, that's to you.
Thank you, Olive, for that question. I want to put it this way. A lot of, as I alluded to earlier on, AMR is essentially being driven by farm animals because of the intensive farming systems that we're looking at, and the fact that we're putting animals in very enclosed spaces, massive numbers of these animals, and this then has an impact on the welfare and the health of that animal. And I want to allude to one or two things that are critical and important. Earlier on, I talked about in animal welfare, we look at things known as fundamental freedoms. Animals have fundamental freedoms that they must enjoy. And interestingly, we even put that in the Constitution, because part of what the national government should be doing is looking at protection and protection of animals and wildlife. If you look at Schedule 4 of the Constitution, I think around about the 22nd bulletin. So that's how critical it is. But what are these fundamental freedoms for animals? Freedom number one is freedom from hunger and thirst, which essentially says that animal must be fed good quality food that is appropriate for its age. The way you feed a day-old chick is not the way you feed a laying hen, for instance. The way you feed a heifer is not the way you feed a dairy cow, a producing dairy cow. And what is important about what you're feeding the animal is that this is what the animal uses to develop its body. So for instance, and I'll give you a classical example in this country, when maize goes off or is rotten in the silos, what do? The most common thing is you hear farmers saying that it should be taken to the feed mill, and if you would Google and look at what has happened previously, that's what we do. But essentially the reason why you cannot use that maize for human consumption is because it has toxins, what are known as mycotoxins, for instance. The way the mycotoxin affects the animal is exactly the same way it affects human. In fact, some animals like dogs are even more sensitive to mycotoxins than human beings are. But the important thing to understand is that when you feed an animal with that maize, the animal does two things. One, it will concentrate that mycotoxin and put it back on your table, either in milk or in eggs or in meat. So the problem we were trying to avoid by scuttling around and taking the maize to the animal is actually coming back onto our table, because the animal then sends it back to us. That's one. But two, an animal that is fed and not fed properly or underfed or has not been eaten well is prone to disease. And that animal, it means that that animal will underproduce, and it also will produce poor quality products that then has an impact on what goes into the food chain. So that's one of the important things that we are looking at. As Mumbo has alluded to, water is critical, and that's why the freedom is about freedom from hunger and thirst. And a lot of our farmers don't even know what water to put into the production system. The rule of thumb is that if you cannot drink the water, don't put it in the production system. Don't give it to an animal. Because the reasons why you can't drink that water is the same reasons why that animal cannot consume that water. It's that simple.
I mean, just the interconnectedness of it all is so astounding. I was in Nairobi West the other day and I saw some hens. My niece pointed them out. That she's Auntie Olive, look at the hens. And they were drinking the water that was being used to clean cars.
Yeah.
So clearly we need to pay keener attention to what we are consuming because it's all connected. I'll be back with Dr. Yamo, Dr. Chodo, and Dr. Mumbo after this break.
How powerful is the healing power of Vaseline? We applied Vaseline jelly to one leaf, the other we left alone. After just a few days, the difference is visible. Nothing locks in moisture better to keep skin restored. That's the healing power of Vaseline.
Kila siku unapokaza mshipi, unapozidi bidii, unapoongeza maarifa ya kuimarisha maisha, unapoongeza nguvu ya kukusongeza mbele, unaposherehekea na kuwakaribisha wengine kufurahia nawe, unapojijenga kibiashara na kuonyesha penzi lako, unga unaozaidisha uko papo hapo, kuzaidisha utamu wa maisha kwa kila namna, kila mara. Familia ya Ajab imeongezeka ili uzidishe mapishi. Mambo ni Ajab.
We'll take nothing for granted and always remember to taste the simple joys. Enjoy the magic of Christmas with Coca-Cola.
Ukikwama, utaambia nini watu? Waambie bra, when I gotta go, I gotta go. Ay, sweetheart, kwani lori imekata break? Bra, when you gotta go with Neptune.
Neptune, toilet paper for wherever you are.
Union Pay cards are widely accepted at POS and ATM nationwide. Union Pay cards can also be widely used for e-commerce payments. These and many more local and international merchants accept Union Pay. Hey Kenya, it's time to earn while you spend with your Union Pay card. Yes, you get 10% back on every purchase, rewarding you as you swipe. Union Pay, your way.
Every spoonful of Nutri comes loaded with the necessary vitamins, protein and minerals for you and your family to become healthier and stronger. Pick up a pack today from your nearest store. Nutri, every spoonful counts.
Welcome back. You're watching Nation Leadership Forum. My name is Olive Barrows. I'm your host, and we're discussing antimicrobial resistance in animal production. So as I said, I have three doctors with me, Dr. Mumbo, Dr. Yamo, and Dr. Ochodo. Dr. Ochodo, before we took the break, Dr. Yamo was explaining to us the rights that animals enjoy, both domestic and wild, and how it's protected in the Constitution. I mean, okay, as everybody's talking about BBI, that came as a surprise to me that their rights are actually enshrined in the Constitution. Now, how does that matter in this discussion to do with AMR?
Thank you, Oliver. Before the break, as you say, Dr. Yamo talked about the 5 freedoms of animals. And these 5 freedoms are really important even in the practice of animal health and food safety. And as a country, we have protected these freedoms in a law. We call it the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And under that law, an animal owner or anybody in whose custody an animal is supposed to do certain things, including observing of those freedoms. And those freedoms, when observed, of course, the animal will be comfortable, and all those things that Dr. Yamo said will happen to the animal. But what is often forgotten is that when you observe these freedoms, then the need to use antimicrobials on animals is almost eliminated or reduced quite significantly, because with proper feeding, no pain, no injury, freedom from thirst and water, you tend to lower the stress in animals, and with that, then the immunity is boosted, and the animal is able to resist a lot of infections in the environment. And if you want to understand this, look at the animals in the wild and the domestic animals. The animals in the wild could be said to have those freedoms, almost all of them. They are in their environment, they are free to do whatever they want, there is feed and so on. But if you compare that to the animals that are domesticated, where we have certain controls, we could be underfeeding and the environment could not be right, and all this exerts stress on the animal and lower immunity and increase susceptibility to disease. Also, before the break, you had asked the question, which animals are important in antimicrobial resistance? Actually, all of them, particularly when we pay attention to the environment. But in terms of food safety, in Kenya, there are certain animals that we are noting are increasingly becoming important in regard to antimicrobial resistance. And one of them is poultry that you referred to earlier. And this is because of overuse of antimicrobials in poultry, because of the environment and the water, everything they take is not good. So farmers, like Yamo said earlier, tend to mask these diseases by continuously actually feeding poultry on antibiotics. And of course, that ends up in the meat and in the eggs, and we take it. The other culprit we have seen is milk, and milk from cattle or any other animal. And the reason for this, again, is the environment where milk is produced, and that makes the cow, prone to mastitis. And that mastitis then requires treatment. And in the course of treatment, the milk is not discarded. We take it and we get those small doses, and we also have that resistance, the microorganisms in us. The other one, again, we've seen is residues of these antimicrobials in meat, beef, for example, and other meats that we consume. We've tended to see certain residues of tetracycline, for example. That is a drug that is widely used in veterinary medicine. And because we consume this meat continuously, again, we are being exposed to these subdoses. It's also important to indicate that heating or boiling hardly makes meat safe because most of these chemicals are very stable, and even with under high temperatures, they survive and they get into our system, and then they create problems in us similar to those in animals. Thank you.
Okay. That raises a couple of problems for the end user. When you tell me that even if I if I cook using really high heat, it doesn't necessarily get rid of the antimicrobial resistance, then what do we do? Are there certain standards, are there certain seals that we should look for when we go to purchase this meat? And I'll come back to you, Dr. Yamo and Dr. Ochodo, on that particular one. As an end user, what can I do to protect myself? Dr. Mumbo, environment, the two gentlemen keep raising the question on environment, and especially with COVID-19, we had scientists telling us that humans encroaching on animal spaces part of what is bringing up these diseases. Why, again, the same question I suppose I asked you before, why we cannot afford to leave the environment out of this conversation, given the One Health approach?
Okay, I think I kind of emphasize the provision within the Constitution that says that that provides for a right to a clean and healthy environment. Yeah, basically, research has actually shown that environmental pollution is actually a major contributor to antimicrobial resistance. For example, when we have air pollution, and this air pollution or the particles contain particles that have got genetic materials which have got resistance to some of these microorganisms that we treat using these antibiotics. We can inhale it through the breathing. We can get this through the water we drink. We can get this through the food we eat. And once it gets into our system, it's not effective when we use antimicrobial in treating ourselves. For example, you mentioned about COVID-19. There's a research that has shown, like in Germany, where there was a high levels of pollution. For example, when you're talking about the parameters, specifically what is called particulate matter, that is the dust, but 2.5. And there's also nitrogen oxide emission. There's also the issue of the temperature and also humidity. There was a correlation that actually showed that where there was some elevated levels of pollution, there was also an increase in the levels of COVID-19, but that is actually a study which is still going on, and I don't want to overemphasize on that. But this can also be seen also in the numbers that we report here in Kenya. You find that we report a lot of cases in the urban areas as compared to other areas. So as long as our environment is dirty, as long as our air is polluted, of course you can be very sure that we shall be sick. And just trying to get into the subject about the role of environment and antimicrobial resistance. Antibiotics, according to in the Environment Management Coordination Act and also the Waste Management Regulation, this belongs to a category of special waste. This is actually the medical waste. And if it's not treated well, normally what happens is that when you collect these antimicrobials, you have to make sure that the active ingredients within the antibiotics are actually inactivated before you can dispose them into the landfills, or maybe you can subject them to incineration. If this treatment, waste management treatment, is not effective, then you'll find that these remain in the environment. There's also, like the presenters who have talked about the poultry farming, they've talked about milk production through the dairy cows. Ultimately what happens is that if these antibiotics are not utilized or come out of the system, they get into the environment through the manures. And once we spread this into the farm, now we find that now they get contaminated through the animal manures. And also there's also an aspect about our municipal waste treatment system. Basically, these are old technology that have not been designed in such a way that can be able to treat these modern conventional antibiotics. You find that if our systems are not upgraded well, you find that these antimicrobials or the active whatever substance end up passing through the system and they're discharged through the environment through the effluent. So we have to invest more on how we protect the environment, because these animals will still feed on the environment. They'll still rely on the grass. And once they get this material from the environment, it gets back into their system. When you treat them, you find that you'll have to use a lot of chemicals to make them healthy, to the point that now these antibiotics are not effective. Thank you.
But how do we treat the ways to guard against antimicrobial resistance? Going off of what Dr. Ayamo and Dr. Ochodo told me, heat may not necessarily be the solution. We are used to, you want to rid your water of dangerous organisms, boil it. How do you treat the waste?
Okay. When it comes to treating the waste, normally when you're dealing with this kind of special waste, we recommend incineration, and these actually we have incinerators that have got 2 chambers and have got elevated temperatures to up to the level of 1,500 degrees centigrade, and under that kind of environment, these microorganisms cannot actually exist. Cannot actually survive. So the best way to deal with this kind of waste is the special waste is incineration. But as I said earlier, normally what happens, this waste has to be collected first. Let's say in a hospital setting or maybe in a dairy setting, they have to be segregated, and the active ingredient within these antibiotics have to be inactivated. This can be done even through autoclaving. You know, there's a system for doing that before. Before they are actually taken out to incineration, and after incineration, now we can take the waste and discharge them into the landfill. So there's no way about it, because it's actually what we refer to as a medical or a hazardous kind of waste.
Dr. Ayamo, I'll bring you in at that point. I don't think my gas cooker can reach those levels of heat. But how can we as the consumers protect ourselves? Is there a way to safeguard or to guard against consuming food, animal products that could raise our risk for antimicrobial resistance?
Thank you, Oli, for that question. I think the important thing is first to look at where we are buying our products from. Because I think the biggest challenge from a wild animal perspective view is that consumers are not even aware where their food is coming from. All you know is you go to a supermarket, you get something off the shelf, and you go home. We need to start interrogating the system and asking, how is this product produced? If it's milk, where did it come from? How is it transported? Because all those things have an impact on the quality of the product that comes onto your table. Of course, the DVS, Dr. Ochodo, will tell you the certification processes. There is inspection that we do for meat and all those products. There are standards that are around them. But for me, I think the responsibility is for us as consumers. One, if I'm buying meat, what is my relationship with the person we are buying meat from? And I'll give you a classical example. Where a year or so back, we did a survey, a CAP survey, knowledge, attitude, and practice survey among Kenyans to just try and understand our level of understanding in terms of use of antibiotics and where we bought our meat from. The interesting thing is Kenyans said, and it's not, let me correct myself, East Africans, because the study was done across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Zambia, said that the place that the least trust in terms of information on meats is the butchery. Of course, the first one was government. Obviously, Kenyans are just like the rest of the world. We don't trust government. The second one was the butchery. But interestingly, 75% of the meat consumed is actually bought from a butchery. So what essentially then we realize is that Kenyans buy their meat from the guy they least trust. How that then works is a challenge. And that's one of the reasons why as an organization we then drive awareness creation. Because then if you start asking questions, if you go to the supermarket and you buy a piece of meat or chicken, Do you understand what the DVS mark on that package is all about? What the KEBS mark is all about? What that means? I think those are the things we are beginning to ask, and to ask Kenyans, the consumer, to start interrogating. Because from our perspective, if consumers started demanding certain things and making buying decisions, especially as the middle class who are going into these big malls and fast food restaurants, if we started asking the right questions and demanding certain things, it pushes producers to do the right thing. Now that you're aware that if the animal is not being fed well or is not in a good environment, and I can tell you that the big organizations that are beginning to do audits, big hotels that are beginning to do audits, part of that audit should be looking at the welfare of that animal. Are the fundamental freedoms being met? Is the animal being fed well, which was the freedom number one? Freedom number two, the animal should be in a comfortable environment. I challenge you and the viewers out there, go and look at the dairy herds that we have. Animals are standing in muck with a lot of, the cow dung is there, the animal literally can't even have an opportunity to sleep. The teats are in that muck. The milk that comes from that process will ultimately have a negative impact on the population that consumes it. Those are the things we need to start asking. When you're buying from supermarket X or from restaurant X, what are they doing in the value chain to ensure that that animal is being catered for? The third freedom is about freedom from pain, injury, and disease. I see people going to some local markets where the animal is being brought, the chicken is being brought hanging on a motorbike. You're going to eat that chicken. It has got a lot of stress because it's been hanging on the motorbike. It will end up with a broken limb, which is a foci for bacterial contamination, which then ends up on your plate. If it's a pig tied behind the motorbike, or it's a group of animals being moved, beef animals being moved in a place where they can't even fit. And we watch these things happening. The challenge is for us then to take certain decisive decisions, because those are the things that end up on our plates. We did a research a year back with University of Nairobi and one of the big chicken producers. And we found out because of just poor transportation, farmers are losing between 25,000 shillings and 155,000 shillings per cycle. A good farmer, a good broiler farmer will produce 6 cycles in a year. So the farmer is already losing 900,000 shillings per year because of poor welfare. And if he's doing business, that welfare needs to be sorted for him to then make good money, and the product that ends on our table is good quality product that has no impact. Because of that poor welfare, which we are masking because of by using antibiotics, we end up with a problem that is ending into human populations. In fact, my position in some of these things is that we need to move away from clinical practice, because I think this country has spent a lot of money looking at clinical practice. When you get sick, how you'll be treated. So we treat our doctors nicely, we give them better pay, etc. We need to go back to preventive medicine. Okay. When I went to school, I was told prevention is better than cure. If you sort out the animal production system, then you don't end up with milk with aflatoxins, which then causes cancers. You don't end up with organisms that cause antibiotics, which are resistant to antibiotics that cannot be treated. In fact, the interesting thing, globally, we are losing 700,000 people per annum because of having diseases that cannot be treated. Okay. So if we started looking at that system and correcting what is happening at that system, we end up with a better production system that then gives us better products and reduces antimicrobial resistance.
You know, a lot of what you're saying is bringing to mind what Dennis Okari did when he did White Alert and Red Alert, and perhaps you should go back to YouTube, search for that and rewatch, and it can help put this conversation into context. I mean, when you talk about transportation, you know what's coming into mind? I come from Mukambani, and there are those buses, and then there are those vikapus on top full of chicken, and I always feel so sorry for them with all that wind and exhaust and all that. But this is a good point to bring in the government perspective. Dr. Chodo, the ball is in your court. Part of what Dr. Yomo told us we need to pay attention to are those stickers that accompany meat products. Do say something on this subject.
Yes, thank you. In addition to what Dr. Amo has said, as government, we insist on a number of don'ts and do's. And the first don't is that you should not consume products from animals that are under treatment. So if it's milk, if it's eggs, if it's meat, there is usually a prescribed withdrawal period within which products of those animals should not be consumed. And that can range from a few days to very many days. Number two, the do that we insist on is to carry out measures that reduce the need for use of antimicrobials in animals. And there are a number of measures. One of them is vaccination. So we vaccinate animals against diseases, and these are common diseases like foot and mouth disease, Newcastle disease in poultry, and many others, so that they develop antibodies, that is resistance, and therefore they are not susceptible to diseases, which would then require the use of antimicrobials, either for symptomatic treatment or for treatment of the diseases. We also advise on biosecurity measures in establishments where animals are kept. And biosecurity measures basically involve prevention of disease-causing organisms getting into your establishment. So you observe hygiene, you reduce visitors, and you check on the sources of feed, water, and so on, so that at any one time you are sure your animals are not exposed to what could cause specified diseases. As government also, we advise certain control measures like vector control, or vectors are simply living organisms that transmit disease, and examples are mosquitoes and ticks or tsetse flies. So there are control measures we have put in place. And if we control the diseases by managing these vectors, then again the animals don't fall sick, and we do not need to use antibiotics. So to help us, that we have created, the country has created as an agency called the Veterinary Medicines Directorate that oversees that and helps the public to understand some of these things. And that agency works with the Directorate of Veterinary Services to ensure that some of these things are observed, particularly withdrawal periods, and even some of these measures are put in place. I've talked about. The agency is also the one that registers all of these antimicrobials of veterinary importance, and therefore they monitor the development of resistance to these antimicrobials in the environment, and they are best placed to advise animal owners on the measures I've spelled out, so as to reduce exposure to antibiotics and eventual development of resistance by certain microorganisms.
Okay, and you anticipated my next question, because in Kenya the challenge is always enforcement. We always have the most beautifully set out policies, but enforcement is always a challenge. I'll come back and get Dr. Yamo's take on how well he thinks the Directorate is doing in enforcing these standards, as well as engage Dr. Mumbo more on what AMR and COVID have to do with one another after this break.
Jichanue na data statements, kujua vile bundles zinatumika. Dial *544# and select check balance. Kumbuka pia, the first time you access your data statements, una get 200 MBs completely free.
To help fight the spread of coronavirus, learn Lifebuoy's hand washing habits. Wash hands with soap or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Together, let's help fight the spread of coronavirus in Kenya.
ahead is believing to make each day a brighter day. The confidence to create opportunity. It's those small acts that go a long way. Going ahead is us changing our communities to go ahead. Now, that is the Kenyan spirit.
Nivea Men Deep Antiperspirant with the power of black carbon formula. 48-hour protection from sweat and bacteria. For a deep, clean feeling that lasts. New Nivea Men Deep Antiperspirant. Nivea Men. It starts with you. Official sponsor of Real Madrid.
In Kenya, 1 in 2 children suffer from cavities. Brushing with Pepsodent removes bacteria and repairs tiny holes before they become cavities. Because every smile matters.
When the world changed, it made us go back to the simple joys and love the little things even more. Like serving up your best, eating together, and sharing more. Now, we'll take nothing for granted and always remember to taste the simple joys. Enjoy the magic of Christmas with Coca-Cola.
I wish I could have soft and glowing skin.
New Geisha Black Soap with activated charcoal to give you soft and glowing skin. New Geisha Black Soap and New Geisha Moringa.
This week on The Trend, the funny man, Mwana Mtule.
Rungu za polisi sio mkate eti utakula na ufurahia.
Super producer, Mutoria. The melodic singer, Mel. On the decks, DJ E. All this and more, only on The Trend.
How powerful is the healing power of Vaseline? We applied Vaseline jelly to one leaf, the other we left alone. After just a few days, the difference is visible. Nothing locks in moisture better to keep skin restored. That's the healing power of Vaseline.
Geisha aloe vera and honey, made with the goodness of aloe vera to calm and refresh your skin.
Be strong and last long.
Close Up Deep Action with antibacterial formula and deep cleaning gel keeps your teeth clean and protected. Close Up Deep Action. Enjoy long-lasting fresh breath and more.
Every time Gran arrives, she always has a small reward for her.
I made this for you today.
Ah, thank you, my baby. It's so beautiful.
Wow!
She's happy, and I trust it because it's made with milk and other carefully controlled ingredients without any colorings or preservatives. Care has been taken to make it. I love to see her happy because it meets her taste and fantasy. Kinder Joy, my trust, their joy.
When the world changed, it made us go back to the simple joys and love the little things even more. Like serving up your best, eating together, and sharing more. Now, we'll take nothing for granted and always remember to taste the simple joys. Enjoy the magic of Christmas with Coca-Cola.
Man, you got to have game. When it's all sweat, pressure and anxiety. Yet that's just halftime. Stay cool and in the game with Imperial Leather for Men range. Wear luxury. A little luxury goes a long way.
Do more to protect yourself and family from viruses that remain on the clothes. Separate laundry that has been exposed and do not shake to minimize the possibility of dispersing the virus through the air. Soaking your laundry in water and hand washing powder does more to kill germs than just a normal wash. After washing, dry your clothes in direct sunlight.
They say we do the expected. We say we're more than you expect. Sunlight, more than you expect.
It's always a full house this season when the family comes together.
To reconnect.
One thing we do,
We watch GoTV. We love it.
It's all about making the holidays special.
For the kids.
That means keeping the GoTV subscription active because they love it.
GoTV is everyone's favorite place this festive season.
Usimiss out. Get GoTV decoder kwa shilingi 1999.
GoTV. Love it.
Every spoonful of Nutri comes loaded with the necessary vitamins, protein and minerals for you and your family to become healthier and stronger. Pick up a pack today from your nearest store.
Nutri. Every spoonful counts.
Welcome back. You're watching Nation Leadership Forum. We're talking about antimicrobial resistance in animal production. Before we took the break, Dr. Ochodo went to great lengths to tell us how government is working to guard against this. Dr. Yamo, do you think they are doing enough?
Thank you, Oli, for that question. The way I want to answer it is what the general public feels. And we as an organization, World Animal Protection, conducted an international poll around use of antimicrobial and who should be held responsible for certain things. The poll was done in 15 countries across the globe, Kenya being one of them. We had 15,600 respondents. Kenya, each country had about 1,000. The important thing that came out is that generally, people feel that government is started to do certain things right, but there are things they need to do better. And 2 or 3 things came out clearly. One, government needs to start tracking and monitoring who is using these antibiotics. When I worked for in another life, when I worked for another organization, we tried finding out how much antibiotics are used in this country. And the challenge is, at that point, it was difficult to get what goes to humans and what goes to animals. And so I think while government is registering these products under the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, we need to start also looking at monitoring their use, going to the level of the agrovet. If the agrovet dispenses 15, 20 vials of that antibiotic, where is it going to? Because as far as I know, and the law is very clear, antibiotics are prescription-only drugs. So how farmers go to an agrovet and buy them over the counter is something that we need to start dealing with, especially if you are going to start using these drugs in a prudent manner.
Okay.
The second thing, which I think is important, is that government has also started setting out certain policies. And in this country, I think Dr. Ochodo can confirm, we have a national policy for reduction of antimicrobial resistance and a work plan that goes with it, which organizations like us have been contributing to and trying to ensure that it is being delivered. As you said earlier on, it's not just a policy that's sitting on the table, but it's being delivered. And I think I must give credit to government that that is ongoing and we are engaged. There are certain things that we are looking at in infection treatment control. As Mumbo said, bringing together all players in a One Health sort of forum, and that is critical and important. I think we need to push it even harder. My feeling is the last 2 years we've stayed more at the national level. We need to go down deeper to the county level so that counties are actually engaged, because both veterinary and human medicine are devolved and it's something that they need to look at.
I like what you've said about the agrovets. And Dr. Mumbo, if you thought you were getting off easy, no, you're not. Unajua umeniingiza baridi ukiongelea mambo ya air pollution and water. Yeah, what is NEMA doing to guard against antimicrobial resistance?
Okay, what NEMA is actually doing is actually creating education and aggressive environmental awareness. For example, this topic of microbial resistance is actually an emerging topic and people don't know about it. And especially it looks more or less about a pharmaceutical field, but not very much an environmental field in nature. So the issue is to educate people about this resistance, about antibiotics, and also after they've understood about antibiotics, now put into systems that will actually deal with the waste that are generated from our health sector, you know, how we shall be able to do or, you know, do proper farming. For example, when you are treating your animals using antibiotics, the manure that you collect during that period of treatment is not actually what you should actually use within the environment. You also need to train them about even when there are, you know, some even practice aquaculture, that is actually fish farming. And you know, like for fish farming, when you put them into cage and you want to treat them, you have to normally, you know, apply antibiotic into this, you know, and you find this getting into the environment. So basically, you know, training them about these antibiotics, letting them know that, you know, these are, besides treating us, they are toxins, and we have to know how to use them so that, you know, we don't overburden the environment. And as one of the presenters mentioned there, you know, there's a national action plan for the prevention and control of this antimicrobial, which was already developed, and you know, the Ministry of Environment also sits within that within action plan. And one of the outputs here is we've developed waste management guidelines for the health sector, and also waste management guidelines for the veterinary sector. This actually, you know, gives a proper methodological approach on how you collect waste, how you categorize them, how you treat them before you dispose them into the environment, and also it gives recommendations on how you know, that will guide research on how to improve current waste management system that have been used to dealing with the old type of waste, but not this kind of waste system. And in addition, we're also doing environmental monitoring and also research. For example, we've been doing air quality assessment, especially of the urban areas and the areas which are polluted. It's really important that we really want to know how, which cities, which sectors. For example, within the city, we want to know the quality of air within a residential area, within an industrial sector. Why the quality of air? Because when you incinerate waste, when you incinerate manure, when you incinerate these antibiotics, you know, this will actually end up into the environment. Or let's say when you treat this through the waste or the wastewater treatment system, if the system is not clean or effective, the effluent, what I mean, the wastewater that gets into the environment, will actually drain with all this into the environment. So the authority is actually working hard on actually undertaking aggressive air quality assessment. We have an equipment that does that. And we also, you know, control also the effluents that actually get into our rivers. And in addition to that, we also coming up with I think I've already mentioned about the guidelines, and yeah. And in addition, we also encourage the public, they should avoid you know, just disposing you know, antibiotics through the sink or through the toilets, because ultimately this will actually get up into the environment and they will, you know, get into a water table. And once we have these active ingredients of these pharmaceuticals or antibiotics in the environment, you know, these organisms become really resistant, and it actually becomes difficult even to treat them. And you know, you'll find that the same animals that we depend on food, you know, for milk, you know, will go back to the same environment and feed on them. And you can imagine what that kind of a vicious cycle that will come. And in addition, it's also recommended that assuming that we have to use antimicrobials within the poultry sector or within the dairy, you know, we need to have a proper campaign on how to, you know, monitor these antibiotics, because antibiotics require a certain duration, you know, so that they can be effective. Once it has been used, you know, it is advisable that the waste or the manures that have been generated or the sewage sludge that have been generated within this time, they can, you know, you collect them, incinerate, or maybe treat them first before you can now go to utilizing the same manure. As I mentioned earlier, you know, if you have a polluted environment, you'll have sick people, you'll have sick animals. So it's imperative, it's our responsibility, even as the public, that we put a lot of focus. You know, we play our role on how to make sure that the environment is clean. Let us wash our hands clean, you know, for 20 seconds. You know, that's actually a very a proper way of actually controlling sickness, you know, so that we don't end up using antibiotics. I mentioned the COVID, you know, you say like if you have a polluted environment, of course, this pollution will actually weaken your immune system. And once this virus gets into your system, you know, it will find a body which is weak and cannot defend itself against diseases. So when we talk about animal health, when we talk about human health, and, you know, let us also think about what burden do we put on the environment, or how can we prevent these sicknesses by taking care of the environment?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mumbo. I don't think many of us really think about how we dispose of this medication. Like when your medication expires, I just put mine in the garbage bag. I really don't think about where it ends up. So that was a good point to raise. Really need to think about it. Dr. Yamo, they say, ask not what your country can do for you. What is, or government in this case, what is how is World Animal Protection playing its role?
Thank you, Olive. First, let me put it this way. World Animal Protection is an animal welfare organization. So our interest is on the animal and the welfare of that animal. But as an organization, we've then realized and understood that when the animal is catered for and its fundamental freedoms are catered for, then the animal gives us better livelihoods, better products. In fact, we're saying animal welfare, human welfare are intrinsically combined, and you can't do one and leave the other. And that's one of the things that we're doing. But as an organization, we work around 3 strands. One is education and mobilization, which is essentially what we are doing here today. It's raising awareness on the pertinent issues that are linked to animal welfare and how they impact on the animal itself, and ultimately the impact on the general population. So that's one. The second thing we are looking, and in terms of education, we have been part of that process. We push education. Dr. Ochodo can tell you all the colleges that do animal health, and it's now a requirement for them to study animal welfare. When Ochodo and I went to university, that was not a subject, but now it has become that critical. We have pushed that through curriculum in the education sector, and the new curriculum actually pushes it down to primary school level so that people can start dealing with animal welfare from an early age, because when you know how to treat animals from that age, even if it's your dog, then you have better, you have a better animal that then doesn't give you problems. The second thing we do is about lobby and advocacy, and we've been involved in creation of laws. Currently, we have a law that is going through the system, I think Dr. Ochodo knows, around Animal Welfare and Protection Bill, which is about improving on what Ochodo talked about earlier on the Prevention of Cruelty to Animal Act, CAP 366. Beyond that, we've worked globally. In fact, in Africa, we've worked with the African Union to develop the African Animal Welfare Strategy for Africa, which is what is driving animal welfare on the continent. And we're trying to get it into the regional economic communities and down into national. The Kenyan one, I think we have a draft animal welfare policy that is also going through that system. So that's part of what we look at, trying to drive that agenda. The last is what we call catalyzing sustainable solution, which is about working with critical sectors of industry and critical sectors of society to ensure that good practice is then pushed down to, is adopted and then is upscaled. So for instance, we are working with big producers, both poultry and pigs in this country and in this region, to look at how can we then improve on production systems. I want to allay a fear, because I had something might get out of here that chickens are bad because they're all being pumped with antibiotics. I think that's not the correct position. The position is that there are players in the industry that are doing the correct thing. I've worked in that industry for the last 20-something odd years, and the reality is that we as a country can produce chicken or pigs without using antibiotics. And what we need to do is to push it to the next level, the small-scale farmers, so that they do the right thing. If they get the right housing, they get the right food, they do the proper vaccinations, they allow the animal enough space, then we'll not have challenges with antibiotics. So we are working with industry. We are also working with the retail sector, because ultimately it's about the food value chain, and asking them to do certain things. Start doing audits of your suppliers. Start demanding certain things of your suppliers. Go to the supplier and look at the biosecurity that Ochodo is talking about. Look at how they're handling the animal. Is it being fed properly? Is there traceability to that system? You should be able to trace from farm to fork and ensure that whatever is at the table, if Olive goes to a supermarket and picks a piece of chicken or meat, they should be able to tell Olive which car it was transported it, which feed it fed on. The feed was made from what maize or whatever.
Yeah.
So essentially that's what we're trying to do, is just to rally the general public and everybody towards understanding the importance of animal welfare and connecting it to the food that comes to the table, to our livelihoods, to food safety, to food security, and all those things.
All right, and it's a good thing, Dr. Yamo, you provided that clarification that not all chicken is bad. I was very close to turning my veranda into a chicken farm. Dr. Ochodo, I want to give you the last word on this subject matter. Why is this an important conversation to have now, especially with COVID bringing to the fore the issue of infectious diseases?
Yeah, thank you. This is a topical conversation, particularly now that we have the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic is an emerging disease. And in recent times, we have had a number of emerging diseases. You remember Ebola, you remember the severe acute respiratory syndrome. You remember things like avian influenza and many others. So the nature of emerging diseases is that the world is not prepared for them, and therefore there is hardly any medication that can be used to manage these diseases. So what happens is that the medical fraternity tries to manage the symptoms of these diseases as research goes on to discover what can really be used to take care of these diseases, either as antimicrobials or as vaccines. So in the case of COVID-19, we saw what happened when it came. It started as a small thing, and we saw the symptomatic treatments that were put in place. You remember certain antibiotics that were prescribed, and the symptoms that happen, like pneumonia and organ failure, all these things that happen within the body are managed using the current antimicrobials. So as we go forward, it's very important that we protect the antimicrobials that we have so that we can use them to manage the diseases that exist and any diseases that are likely to come as we prepare to deal with those diseases.
Okay.
It's also important to remember that research in antimicrobials takes a long time and is expensive, and most of what we are using was developed many years ago and is still very relevant, so we really need to protect some of these things.
All right.
And in the phase of COVID, you also had some very old medicines like hydroxychloroquine and so on were mentioned earlier, for the control of that disease. So it's always important to protect these antimicrobials for use. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ochodo. That concludes Nation Leadership Forum for tonight. We are making way for NTV tonight with Mark Masai. But if you're thinking that I'm a farmer, this conversation does not concern me, no. As you heard from Dr. Ochodo, these antimicrobial resistance is affecting the efficacy of medication used to treat UTIs, medication, even ARVs, medication used to treat STDs, and even TB. So this is a conversation that we all need to have. Pay attention to what we can do as citizens to guard against antimicrobial resistance. As I said, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Mumo from NEMA, Dr. Yamo from Animal World Protection, and also thank you, World Animal Protection. Apologies, Dr. Yamo, and also Dr. Ochodo. Thank you so very much, gentlemen. Keep it on TV.